What's up, ego hackers? Welcome to the C.S. Joseph podcast. I'm your host, C.S. Joseph. Rumor has it we're going to be seeing hopefully some Chris Taylor this week, and which is awesome. Be able to have him on the show. I'm very excited to have him here and have him with us to be able to share his extremely valuable opinion with us on the science. It's a big deal. Very big deal. And especially since, I enjoy, his extroverted thinking child actually helps me come to a better understanding of the science as well because of his thematic approach. Logic is great, but what I've come to realize is that when it comes to this science, if the themes don't match the logic, then it's incomplete. And it's possible that, my foundation of logic could be, utilized or understood on a false premise, and then it just will take it in a completely wrong direction. And it's ultimately because of Chris's work that we had to redo some of the mistakes that I presented in the temples, and then that was fixed. I had the opportunity to re-present the temples in Season 18, Cognitive Mechanics, and that helped build an even better foundation for our fundamental understanding that continues to grow of the octagram, basically. So I'd like to give special thanks to Chris to that end for being there with us to facilitate that. So yeah. But today's Acoltye question is about a kindred relationship. It's about ISFPs and INFPs and how these two types have a hard time setting boundaries, probably because I've said that in the past. They absolutely do have a hard time setting boundaries. And basically it really comes down to one thing and one thing only, and that is their parent function. You have extroverted sensing parents from the perspective of the ISFP. You have extrovert intuition parent from the perspective of the INFP. And that ends up causing a lot of difficulties because what happens is that these two functions start out super underdeveloped. I mean, development of the parent function, it wakes up. It's all of a sudden, boom, it's in their head. It starts being there in adolescence. And it's not really utilized that much, as a child. According to Chris Taylor, for example, the trickster function is ultimately what the ego decides to lead with until the parent function actually becomes fully developed and a person's sense of personal responsibility ends up kicking in. So it's because of extroverted sensing parent and extrovert intuition parent being underdeveloped that ultimately these two types really struggle, and I mean really struggle. These two types really struggle with setting boundaries. But there's also another aspect to it. It's not just SE parent, it's not just any parent, but also they have the same inferior function, which is extroverted thinking inferior, which is fear or anxiety or insecurity about their status, their reputation, how they look to other people, how they're regarded, how they're respected by others, how much power and authority they actually have, and whether or not other people think highly of them. These people are hypersensitive and hyper-aware of what other people think about them. And the thing is, too, is that, an ISFP, for example, doesn't like being rejected. Extroverted sensing parent. The INFP doesn't like to be unwanted and not desired by others. Extrovert intuition parent. And when it's really underdeveloped, they can be hypersensitive to that because to a young ISFP, the idea of being rejected by anybody is extremely controversial to them. And it means this person rejected me, so they end up taking it really personally. They take it as if, I don't have enough status, I don't have enough importance as a human being, as a person. I'm not respectable enough. I don't have enough status enough. And then because they see that, they assume that, they're like, then I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy enough, right? That's how they end up rationalizing it within their FI hero. And same thing goes with the INFP. It's like, hey, if I'm not desirable enough, these people are going to think less of me. And then I'm going to feel bad about myself. I'm going to feel like I don't even matter. You know what I'm saying? And that ends up becoming a big problem. A really big problem. Most people don't even understand. They don't understand just how the FI hero has it, basically. Because they're constantly judging themselves as to whether or not they're worthy. They're constantly aware of what makes them worthy, what makes them valuable, what makes them feel good as people, right? Constantly. Constantly they're aware of that. And that ends up getting in the way of proper decision making, because they want to be this principled person. They want to look good in front of others. They don't want to be fake. They don't want to, but then they end up being fake because their FI hero ends up bending to the thoughts of other people through cognitive access, through extroverted thinking inferior, because it's an inferior function. So they have to end up having extrovert intuition parent start developing as a guidance function to guide the inferior function, so that when they transition into their subconscious, so that their inferior function becomes an aspirational function. An extrovert thinking aspirational is like the hero function of the subconscious, basically. Most people see me, whiteboarded out, and they see that I put inferior and aspirational next to each other. But the aspirational really actually belongs to the extroverted thinking hero of the ISFP and INFP subconscious, which is the ENTJ and the ESTJ, respectively. So that sucks. It really sucks. Because in order for those functions to become aspirational, to basically become heroic to a point, they have to be able to transition into their subconscious in an orderly manner. If they're doing it in a chaotic manner, it's just going to blow up in their face. They're going to lose even more status, even more respect, and people are going to think less of them even more. And that just ends up blowing up. Consistently blowing up in their face. Sucks to be them, basically, at that point. So this ends up literally, when that happens, especially when you have a chaotic transition into your ESTJ side or ENTJ side, it literally makes your FI hero start to behave like an introverted feeling inferior. And then they start getting afraid that they're not worth it. They're not valuable enough. They're not worthy enough. They're not worthy enough for this job or for this relationship, etc. It's just this whole thing. It's this whole thing that consistently becomes a problem. And oftentimes, they just don't know what to even do about it. But it really comes down to personal responsibility. Their parent function has to guide their inferior function in such a way, via cognitive circuits, for example, in order to get them into their subconscious in a very healthy way, so that their introverted feeling is not assuming that it's not worthy enough, not valuable enough. So they aren't selling themselves short, basically. And because of that phenomenon, what ends up happening, they end up not able to set up proper boundaries with other people. Because they're so afraid of feeling bad about themselves. They're so afraid of feeling unworthy. They're so afraid of having feelings of powerlessness, or they're so afraid of feeling like they don't have a purpose, that they'll go along with what other people think of them just by default. They'll completely go along with it. And what this means is that other people could even potentially blackmail these people into behaving in certain ways. And that would suck. It would really suck. And they have a hard time, playing the truth card to get out of the blackmail, which can also be a bad thing, especially INFPs, because, their introverted sensing child can find justification for just about anything, and they like to absolve themselves and give themselves excuses about why they should act or shouldn't act, or how certain things don't apply to them, basically, when they do. But anyway, because they're constantly, allowing the judgments of other people, of external other people in their life to be the deciding factor for who they are as a person, and use that as their measure of value, their self-worth, measure of self-worth, it ends up becoming a serious problem. Serious problem. To the point where this is why they don't have boundaries. I feel so bad for extroverted judging inferior functions, and that can even be a bigger problem. A very, very, very big problem. Because especially among women who have these inferior functions, because it leaves the extroverted thinking inferior open to being gaslit, right? especially ISFPs, because their introverted sensing is so low. They have a lack of self-discipline, and because they have their memory, they live in the moment, and a lot of their short-term memory, especially their parent function, is underdeveloped. It gets even worse for them because they can't really remember so well as to what things have happened in the past. So when someone's gaslighting them, they end up being forced through extroverted feeling nemesis to actually reach acceptance that the person gaslighting them and what the person is saying who is gaslighting them is actually saying, something that's true about them. Luckily, INFPs don't have that problem as much, but ISFPs are especially weak to it. So what they end up doing, because they're, that extroverted sensing parent is underdeveloped, for example, it's not able to get in people's face and be like, no, you're not going to do this. Because, extroverted sensing as a function is like an enforcement function. They can set a boundary, with their FI, hero, but they use that extroverted sensing parent to enforce it. Now, it ends up becoming easier, though, for ISFPs over time as their SE parent actually develops to be able to enforce said boundaries, but they struggle with establishing them. When it comes to the INFP, however, it's kind of the exact opposite. They can establish boundaries very easily, but because their extroverted sensing is a trickster, they end up really sucking at enforcing them. That's ultimately where they have to really go to the parent function. Because then, at that point, the extroverted sensing parent is like, okay, should I really be valuing the attention from this particular person or from these people? Or from the INFP perspective, should I really be valuing the desires or wants or goals of these people around me? What about those desires or goals actually affect me or impact me? What does that have to do with me, basically? So they end up having to utilize their parent functions, develop that sense of parent function responsibility, right? Where they are being really responsible with their parent function such that they are able to filter out bad attention and filter out bad desire from people in their life. That way their parent function is protecting their inferior function from the negative thoughts or even the positive thoughts of other people, right? Because the negative thoughts and the positive thoughts of others, they really have to rely on that parent function to just filter out. Because here's the thing, if the parent function is not filtering bad attention, if it's not filtering even positive attention that they shouldn't have, same thing with extrovert intuition, filtering out bad intentions or even positive attentions, which could lead to worse consequences later, then the extroverted thinking inferior is completely exposed, right? It's completely exposed, and then all of a sudden, they can't even set boundaries, much less even have the opportunity to enforce them at all, because they're just going to go along with the crowd. They're just going to go along with what everybody else thinks. And that really puts these two types at risk personally, at risk of being taken advantage, at risk of being gaslit, at risk of being used, right? Especially FI hero women who consistently, because they have an extroverted judging inferior function, they could be consistently used, especially sexually, right? And then if that ends up growing over time, it becomes part of their introverted sensing child, where that's just what they're used to. It's like, oh, this is my lot in life. I guess I have to just accept that this is, I'm just going to be used sexually by men, for example. Or from an introverted intuition child, they end up actually seeking to be used by men, because from their perspective, they end up start tacking on their self-worth via cognitive looping. That introverted intuition child combined with introverted feeling hero, basically, that my self-worth is based on having these sexual relationships with men, these worthless, meaningless sexual relationships with men, and that's where I find meaning, right? With the INFP, it's like, this is just my lot in life. I've just accepted it. This is just what I'm used to. It'll never change. And they throw their hands up and give up. It's really sad to see. And it really just comes down to a lack of parent function development. If their parent functions were far more developed and they were able to exhibit aspects of personal responsibility, they would be able to filter out that attention, that attention that they shouldn't be getting for the ISFP, or filter out that desire, that unwanted desire, and just get rid of it, so that their parent function is literally there for the inferior function. Because otherwise, if the parent function is not there for the inferior, well, guess what? The demon eventually is going to get in the way with the inferior function. And that too will become a problem, because don't forget, the inferior function is on a cognitive orbit with the demon function. If you want to learn more about cognitive orbit, you're going to want to watch the season 18 lectures, Cognitive Mechanics. Some of those videos are being released now to the public. We do one per month, and it's released here on the YouTube channel as an additional newer lecture in Cognitive Mechanics is created every month for the Journeyman members. If you want to become a Journeyman member, csjoseph.life/members. If you want to log in, csjoseph.life/portal. So make sure you guys are checking that out. Get that information in Cognitive Mechanics. It's one of the most important seasons, because Cognitive Mechanics as a season outlines literally every aspect of psychology that we end up having, within the science, and all of the details from a broad perspective are actually shared within that season. And sometimes we go deep as well. So the bottom line is that these two types, in order to have healthy boundaries, to set and enforce healthy boundaries, even though the INFP struggles with enforcing, and they're easier at setting, but they struggle with enforcing, whereas the ISFP has an easier time enforcing than they do setting up said boundaries, they really, really have to work at it. They have to develop the personal responsibility for their parent functions in order to filter out these actions or these desires, these wants, or these actions of other people in their life, so that they themselves are not in this negative position, especially if they're women, because they can be used so easily. They're so susceptible. Their extroverted thinking inferior is so susceptible as a result. So anyway, folks, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.